to achieving SDG 12.3. Thank you.
Thank you, Dipti. I think I might take you up on the last one, coming back in a year's time and hearing the concrete results. So now, before we move to the panel discussion, we need all of you in here in the room activated so you can get your phones out now. I know you're itching to touch your iPhones or whatever you're using. And also, all of you out there online, please, Katala will just get it forward. So now we'll have a short poll. 3 questions. And you need, first of all, to go into slido.com. And the password, when you get there, is #123 IFPRI, IFPRI. Don't write it. Don't write hashtag. Sorry about that. So the password is 123 IFPRI. And when people start looking up from the phones, I will. Oh, I see you already going at it. So first question is, the best way to scale idea business that fights food waste is through and public-private partnerships, access to funding, government-induced incentives, public communications. Oh, they're shifting. Okay. This is like popcorn when it's not ticking so much, you have to stop, but they're still. Okay. Now it's slowing down. Whoa. There's people online. There's a little delay time for people online, so we'll just be patient. Can we reach 100? Okay. I think we'll try. I think we have a rather clear. I want that 100. Okay. I think we'll move on to the next. Yeah? Still coming? You want? The popcorn is still ticking? Yeah.
Get to the 100.
Yeah, get to the 100 and then we move. Okay. Whoa. Wait. Yeah. So I think we go to the next. Oh, sorry. So, who do you see as the main key player in tackling food waste and loss? Consumers, NGOs, multilateral organizations, retailers, and restaurants.
I think this one.
Yeah, it's going faster this time, huh? All of the above. Okay. And 100, and then we move. Okay, we move to the last quick. I did it again. So, what do you do as an individual to fight food waste at home? So thank you. I think I will end it here. Yeah. Thank you, and I will stop it. Okay. So now I'd like to ask the speakers to come up and sit in your respective chairs, and then we will open up for questions in a little while. So we'll take 3 questions at a time, I think, for our speakers, and they will give brief answers. And it would be nice if you can briefly state your name, your institution, and your questions or comment, and who you would like to address it to. And we will also invite the onlines in. I will take you in a little in the next round. But first, I would maybe kick off by using the poll. We saw that it was about partnerships. It was about everyone should get involved. And I think that we picked up on some of those in the presentations. I would maybe come back to you, Victoria. You ended up by talking about collective action, and that is what we saw from the poll. But how do we get that collective action moving?
Yeah, I would say that it starts with, to sort of go back to what we're doing here at Rabobank, is providing public platforms that allow us to give, I guess, a platform for these innovations, these entrepreneurs to stand up and talk about what they're doing. Funding is incredibly important for these guys to continue to do what they're doing. And, you know, it starts off, I think, as a little bit of a a passion and an interest for them, and it turns into much more than that. And I think that what inevitably ends up happening is they don't get the funding and they don't get the partnerships, and that's what we're trying to do with giving a public platform like Food Bites, is opening them up to industry leaders, opening them up to corporates, opening them up to potential investors to provide that platform.
Thank you. Now I'll open up the floor. I can already see some hands. Yes, please. Yes.
This is, my name is Ipsita. I'm from the
Oh,
University
sorry,
of
there's a mic. There's a mic coming.
Hi, I'm Ipsita. I'm from the University of Maryland. This is mainly targeting like the speakers who came from research institutions. We talked about the role of farmers in waste, but have you seen any results that how government subsidies have impacted food loss in particular? Thank
and
you.
The next one, the gentleman over there.
I'm wasting my tea. So my name is Bela from Hungarian Embassy for Agricultural Attaché, and I see very good presentation. And just a quick notice, I mean, I think your presentation was very good, and what I'm missing from here, the farmers, the Farm Bureau. I mean, we're talking about them, but I would be happy to see them and to tell them what we think about it. So just that's all my notice, and I think Rob was very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alicia. I'm from China. I'm studying at George Washington University. I'm studying international development. And my question is about cultural barriers. Taking leftover food in some culture may relate it to poverty or shame. So during the implementation of your programs, have you ever encountered cultural barriers, and how did you overcome those barriers? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the panel, I think the first question was for the research institutions. So who would, Schengen, would you?
Yeah, I think the subsidy is the big elephant in the room. Yeah, we spent probably $500 billion or $600 billion in subsidizing grain production. By doing that, we actually depress food prices, particularly grain prices. And obviously, when the food is cheap, when the grains are cheap, and people waste. So that's a big part of the problem. Now, I wanted to also mention about the farmers. Yeah, I was a farmer maybe 40 years ago in China. By that time, we were very poor. We don't waste any food. But I mean, at least our intention was. But how can we really make sure that we have certain technologies, whether it's farming technology or storage, to make sure that the crops in the field do not fall down when there is a wind, a strong wind, strong let's say, rainfalls, and also storage. What sort of technology, what sort of methods you can really store the food, because sometimes we eat rotten food for a year or two. That's not good for our health. The cultural barriers, yes, I think, Mr. from my experience, there was a big shift in China. Some years ago, it is a must. We have some food left on your dining table when you entertain your guests. That's a sign of prosperity or being polite. But today, actually, it's a shame if you order too much food, if you waste food. And it's a shame if you don't, let's say, bag your food left from your dining table. I think that it can be changed. I mean, that's if the society is aware. I mean, we were talking about awareness, right? I do think the awareness is very much part of that, and communication is a very big part of that.
Thank you, Shingen. So, Rob, would you? And then Espen.
Following up on what Shingen said and taking the three questions in one, basically, is like the key promise to solve a coordination problem in the food system. So typically we see farmers that have a lot of food losses are sort of in a bind, because if they let they don't harvest everything, or they have the things that they don't market, then they lose money. If they take it to market and the market doesn't work properly, the prices plunge. If everybody does at the same time, they still don't make any money. So what needs to be solved is the coordination problem that the markets work. So when you see that the food chains are working better, right, from the farm onto the market, that there's storage space, there's processing capacity, then we don't lose that effect, and then the farmers can have the gain. So I think that also answers the question about the subsidies. A lot of the subsidies that we see is they're promoting production. They're not promoting the development of the full chain, right? So if we don't do that, then we may be pushing in one direction, but just encourage more losses along the chain. I guess that's also the answer to the question, well, where the farmers, so it's the farmers, they're just one part of the chain, and an important part of the chain, but they're in this bind, as I said. So if the rest of the chain is not properly organized, then you see very little success. So for instance, and other research that we've done, which I didn't mention, if you get so-called storage and cold chain development, for instance, it's found in potato markets in India, for instance, then you can get almost zero food loss, simply because the chain is working better, and farmers can also smooth the production over the seasonality of the harvesting, such that that things work more efficiently and you get much less food loss.
Thank you, Rob. Espen?
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions. Definitely the cultural barriers are a thing we see around the globe in, of course, different paths depending on where you are. We have a better buying lab in World Resources Institute, where we are trying to push the agenda by analysis and how the industry creates language for some of these things. We need to use that language also in fighting food waste and in having more healthy diets. So that's definitely a part of it. But I also think, and that's a thing I have noticed through many years, because I had the pleasure as a minister to start the World Food Summit in Copenhagen, and a lot of the discussions there really was about moral issues. So we need to have a push for a moral philosophy as well in society in general, especially in the developed countries, to say it's not okay to lose food. And we, of course, as a research institution, can contribute with data and insights, but it's very important also to push the agenda from a moral perspective. And I think you touched upon the other parts, so I don't need to do that.
Thank you, Espen. Yeah, Denise?
So I would just like to mention, too, that we are to the culture barriers. We are very careful about how we connect zero hunger and zero waste. But we fully believe that we won't end hunger as long as we are still wasting so much food and sending so much food to the landfill. So when we talk about zero hunger, zero waste, we also note that the food that we donate to go to our communities is not food waste. And the WRI, Food Loss and Waste Standard calls that out as well, because it counts food waste as after donations. So we truly have a little bit of a communications challenge sometimes to make sure that we're using the right language and that we emphasize that we are giving healthy, nutritious, wholesome food to people in our communities to eat. And then what we cannot give to people, we recycle. So we have about 2,000 of our stores have active food waste recycling programs, and those include composting, animal feed, and anaerobic digestion, depending on where we are in the country. So we do have programs, that help handle our food waste after we rescue as much as we can.
Thank you, Denise. Now, I would like to invite the online audience in. I know there are questions. So could we have maybe 3 of the questions for the panel, please?
Hi. So there are 2 questions from our Facebook online audience. The first one is Gauda from India. He asks, what's your strategy in preventing food losses with most populous and agri-sector dependent country like in India? And the second one is from Zambia. In Zambia, Enoch asks, how could you use the private sector players in countries like Zambia, which have been badly hit by severe drought?
Okay, Amy, I don't think that's for you. You will be asked in a little while, so maybe Schengen first.
I think you need $1 million, maybe even more, to answer that question. But I think, as Rob said, we need a comprehensive approach. One is the technology. Do we have good technology? Let's say in the whole value chain from the production side. The Green Revolution actually is introduction of semi-dwarf wheat and rice. That actually is the prevention of food loss in the field. So you increase the yield by using more fertilizers. You need a strong straw. So the semi-dwarf means strong, shorter straw that can use more fertilizer to produce more grains. So technology, even on farm, then processing, transportation, so the technology part, the incentive part, the price, yes, I think we needed to fix the price. The farmers or even traders do not have the right incentives. It's to save the food, to prevent the loss or waste of the food. And then the consumers, obviously, they need knowledge, information, data. Another big issue, maybe a couple of big issues, is nutrition. Nutrition. Most of the food we lost is actually nutritious foods. But in the meantime, we're facing not just the hunger, but lack of micronutrients called hidden hunger. So that link has not been discussed much. The second one is actually overweight obesity. We simply eat too much. When we eat too much, we waste food. We emit more carbons into the air. It also creates health problem for ourselves and for the society. I think India needs a comprehensive approach to tackle that challenge through policy, technology, behavior change, institutional capacity, and beyond.
Thank you. I think Dipti would.
Sure. I'd just like to mention that we are in dialogue with our counterparts in India as well. And I agree with what Schengen had to say. With countries like India, of course, you'll have to think about both the rural as well as the urban, the rapidly urbanizing centers, so focusing on both post-harvest losses in the rural areas as well as solid waste management and the waste issue in these rapidly urbanizing countries. We talk a lot about the global numbers and the macro figures, but we do realize that the solutions will have to be at the local level, so they will have to be targeted and for the situations at the local level. And just to mention that we are engaging with the private sector as well. We want to make sure that this is a private-public partnership in the work that we do, and we see that important. Thank you.
Thank you. And Esben?
Yeah, I think one of the answers to whether it's in Africa or in Asia, to both of the questions, is really that we have a structured approach, like the approach the World Bank is planning on. We launched a report before Christmas, World Resources Institute, the World Bank, and UN agencies on how to feed the planet in a sustainable manner in the future. And we have to have one here, I can see. Not to make commercials, but a little product placement is okay. What we see in a lot of places around the world when we work with this policy is really that we don't have a structured approach and we don't implement best practices all over. So a lot of places we try to reinvent the wheel, which is really not necessary. So having a structured approach with national governments, it could be in India or in regions in India, or for instance in Zambia or other African countries, with money from the World Bank, with expertise from institutions like IFPRI, World Resources Institute, and national countries' development policies, we can actually tailor solutions at the ground level. And then I think, as Schengen also touched upon, the capacity building is crucial, because when the program ends one day, we really need local people to be able to push it forward. And that's why not only the World Bank, but also Rabobank's approach is so highly, highly interesting, seen from a perspective from the World Resources Institute.
Okay. Thank you, Esben. I think we'll come back to the room now. I see more hands. Yes. The guy, yeah.
My name is Jose. I'm just a citizen activist on this issue, but I was just wondering, nobody on the panel talked about the food loss and waste around animal and protein production, everything from the bycatch when we harvest seafood to the waste that's involved in industrial animal production.
Yes, and the lady next to
Sabina O'Hara, Dean of Agriculture here at the University of the District of Columbia, actually Agriculture and Urban Sustainability, if you can believe that. Thank you, first of all, for your presentations, great presentations. I'm wondering if the waste loss issue isn't a bit of a larger issue beyond the value chain of food, and I'm thinking particularly of water. Have any of you done any work on this? Because of course, agriculture is also the biggest freshwater consumer. And while we've made some inroads in transportation and in energy generation, in shrinking the footprint of those two sectors, we have made very little inroads in shrinking the footprint of agriculture. And so it seems to me what you're describing is this larger question of the circular economy. And how do we get there from here? Thank you.
Thank you, Sabine. And there was, yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Julie Kurtz. I'm here at IFPRI. I was wondering about how you think that integrating these kinds of practices within an organization around food waste, how building that consciousness within the culture of an organization affects the kind of research and work that an organization does, so that internal integration into the external facing work that an organization like IFPRI or others might do.
Maybe take one more. Yes, gentleman in the back.
Will Martin from IFPRI. Wonderful presentations. Thank you very much. One question in my mind, though, when we think, we're obviously loss and waste is bad news, from a global point of view. But when we think through what's the impact on the poor, the loss and waste that can be averted via the mechanisms that Rob talked about, storage bags for small producers who are suffering from loss of their food during storage, that's very clearly an income gain to those poor households. It's not so clear that increasing or reducing loss in the rich countries has the same direct impact on poverty and food security of the poor. It probably does help, but it's probably a lesser order of magnitude of help, I suspect. That we shouldn't, I'm just thinking perhaps we should prioritize more reducing losses that generate those direct income gains to poor people in the same way we should prioritize improving productivity of small poor farmers.
Thank you. I think I will turn back to the panel now, and I think maybe Amy, I think this could be picking up on the last question could be.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously the food that we recover at the kitchen goes into shelter meals that we send out to our agencies. However, I think, you spoke to a crucial point that, in the U.S., the way that food recovery works, for the most part, it goes to food banks, and that food gets sent out to people who need the food, and it's kind of this never-ending cycle. And while, yes, it's great that that food is going to a place that people can eat it, and that's wonderful, it inherently is not helping those people rise out of their situations. And that's obviously where the work of the kitchen, we strive to fill, to figure out how we can close that gap by creating jobs and creating opportunities rather than just continuing that cycle. But I'd love to hear other thoughts from the panelists. Just wanted to give one kind of interesting example on meat, because obviously we have talked about fruits and vegetables a lot, but kind of an on-the-ground example. We have partnered with the Honey Baked Ham Company. Everyone, think of the Honey Baked Hams you get at Christmas time. They're beautiful and they're perfectly shaped. There's many stores around this area, and they actually have all of the cuts of the ham that don't make it into those pretty displays. Typically, we're getting thrown away. And then a local church got involved and said, hey, can we take that somewhere? And so that is turned into thousands of pounds of great pieces of ham that gets donated to us and Martha's Table, an Arlington Food Assistance Center every month that goes into our meals. There's just so many little pieces where food waste happens, and sometimes it just takes somebody taking action and doing something about it.
Thank you, Amy. Rob, please.
Again, also to continue on the question of what does it mean to the poor, but starting at the early stage of the food chain. Of course, if you manage to reduce food loss, and it also means that farmers can sell more in the market, then there will be a gain on the side of the poor. Of course, there can be a trade-off if, like also with what I showed in our experiments, if there's a premium on the better quality food, means that food also becomes a bit more expensive, and that may have a trade-off to some of the poor if they can't afford it. And then in many cases, they get more value for their money, but they may not see that because it's still the same product. So that's something that needs to be looked at. Likewise, also if and that links a bit to the previous points I've been making, is the whole system needs to work properly to make things happen. So like we've been working with a small business that called the Cold Hubs in Nigeria, that does solar-powered cooled storage space for fruits and vegetables. And that's working very well. And you would expect that because of in those cases, sometimes 40 to 60% reductions in food loss because of the existence of the food of the cold storage space, then also prices in the market would drop. But the cost of actually the investment that needs to be made to establish the cold chain is not throwing the prices down and making it more accessible. And that's part of because not the whole chain is cooperating such that the markets adjust to the greater supply against the existing demand. So that's the things that you have to look in, so that they're not automatic win-win-wins, but we need to look at it through the chain and then see that either the prices go down because we help reduce food losses, or that there's the recognition that because of the quality, the increased quality, that it also pays off to poor people to buy those products with a premium.
Thank you, Rob. Now I'd like to turn to Dan, and how does this look from Brooklyn?
Cool. So I think to address the question about how does internal behaviors affect the external ones, this is more of, I think, at a micro level because it's at a restaurant level and at a more interpersonal level. But what we've found is that some shops that use us as a very simple solution for maybe their surplus sandwiches or maybe their pastries, once they start to see an impact on that, they begin to view their shrink a little bit differently. So it becomes, all right, we have some really good like fresh mozzarella, which we normally have to take off the shelves, and that's just part of our loss. But now we're going to use this as a solution because this isn't just an opportunity to sell it, it's an opportunity to maybe drive a new customer in. So that's one side on the business piece. The other one is on the people that are actually posting the food. So the employees that are actually involved, a lot of the times they are probably making minimum wage, and fresh mozzarella isn't normally something you add to a minimum wage budget. So being able to engage and have a really positive action that knows that you're no longer throwing out the food, but you have a solution for it, transfers back to the home, and they start to kind of look at their food differently there too. So not at the corporate level, but at the restaurant level, we definitely see some movement and a positive feedback loop.
Thank you. And Esben?
Yeah, to answer Sabine O'Hara's question about water, we have a big water program at WRI where we work from everything research to groundwater mapping, scarcity of water, how that impacts food production, how can you improve yield without using more water, and so forth. So that's an integrated part of our whole approach in food production, and also in our recommendations to governments, UN, and so forth, when we work around these issues. On the question from the gentleman on proteins, it's very interesting. When I was a boy, I grew up on a dairy farm, and we would get the wee back from the dairy as a leftover product that we would give to the calves because nobody knew what to do about it. But suddenly someone at Arla Foods found out that that could be $1 million or billion-dollar industry if you could extract the protein out of the wee and use that for children's food. So today that's a major export into the global market. The same with the pulp from potatoes, the starch, that you can improve that as a part of your production. And I mention it because that's really technologies that are in the market, but we need investments, we need smallholders to be able to use already known technology in developing countries to get a better business case out of their leftover products. And that's really an important part of developing ground production.
And so I will end by giving the word to Victoria and then Denise, and then we'll...
Yeah, just to follow on from that conversation around animal proteins, as Esben was just touching on, seafood is definitely a big trend that we're seeing. We know that there's a huge issue. It's the second largest food waste product after fruit and vegetables. I think we find it's 35%. So it's definitely something that we're seeing come through in an innovation perspective. We have a lot of technologies that are trying to come up with bycatch solutions to minimise that waste that I think so many of us eat the same sorts of fish when we go to the supermarket or we go to our fish or seafood store. So I think that there's an issue that we're all eating the same things that we know. It's a upskilling, it's a knowledge thing, but I think the bycatch is a huge issue for us, and we're seeing a huge amount of technology come through, which is really exciting. And on the animal protein side, we're also seeing, we have our next event, which is in San Francisco, Food Bite San Francisco at the end of March. Not to plug it, but we do have our first ever pet food company that we'll be pitching, which is really exciting, also seeing that in the animal protein space.
So just to mention really quickly on animal protein. So sometimes people are surprised to hear that at the retail level, half of what we donate is meat. So meat is actually the easiest thing for us to donate because we can freeze it. And then there's not as much urgency for the pantries and food banks to come pick it up as quickly. Our bigger donation opportunity is actually produce because it is so hard to keep that fresh for the people who want it. So, and then for seafood, we also have been working for many years on how to improve our seafood merchandising and best practices. So it would help us if more customers would buy frozen seafood. Food or seafood that comes in frozen, but that we thaw to sell because people want fresh seafood, we actually have trouble donating after that fact. So we're trying to change kind of how consumers think about seafood and sell more frozen seafood wherever possible.
Thank you. And with that, I think we all should give the panel a big round of applause. And then I will give the floor to Manish Babna. Manish is the Managing Director at World Resource Institute, and he will wrap up this event today and give us some closing remarks.
Great. Good morning, everyone. It's a real privilege to be here with all of you today. incredibly rich and inspiring set of stories. Schengen, I was taken that in China, today is, as you said, National Tree Planting Day. What many of you may not